Right now, you're wearing a piece of clothing that nobody will ever see. You picked it this morning without a single thought. It sits under everything else, doing its quiet job, and if you are like most people, you own somewhere between 10 and 30 of them. Underwear, the most private, least discussed, most universal thing a human can put on their body. You probably think of it as a modern convenience, something with elastic and a brand name on the waistband. But the habit you performed this morning, pulling on that first layer before anything else, is older than farming. Older than writing, older than the wheel. A person did a version of it 5,000 years ago, and we found his. So when did we actually start? And why does every human society cover the same small patch of skin first? You would assume the answer is obvious. Modesty, right? We cover up because we are shy, because some culture somewhere decided certain parts were rude, or maybe hygiene, keeping the good clothes clean. Those feel like the reasons. They are not the reasons, or at least they came late to the party. The real story of underwear starts long before anyone felt embarrassed about anything. And the first people to wear it were not thinking about shame at all. They were thinking about survival. To find the beginning, you have to go back to a moment before clothing existed at all. And weirdly, the best clue we have does not come from cloth. It comes from lice. In 2011, a team at the University of Florida, led by David Reed, studied the DNA of human body lice. Body lice are strange creatures. They cannot live on bare skin. They only survive in the seams of clothing, which means they could not have existed until humans had clothes for them to live in. So Reed's team ran the genetic clock backward to find when body lice split off from head lice. The answer landed around 170,000 years ago. That is the rough birthday of clothing. Not tailored outfits, just the first draped and wrapped animal skins. And here's the part that matters. When a person has one scrap of hide to wrap around themselves, they do not drape it over their shoulders like a cape. They wrap it around the middle. The very first garment humans ever wore was, functionally, underwear. So here's the real puzzle. When did the loincloth stop being just clothing and become the thing you wear under your clothing? When did the layer become a layer? The oldest actual underwear we have ever found belonged to a murder victim. In 1991, two hikers crossing the Tysonjoch Pass in the Alps spotted a body melting out of the ice. Right on the border of Italy and Austria, they assumed it was some unlucky climber. It was a man who had died around 1300 years ago, frozen so perfectly he still had his last meal inside him. An arrowhead sat on his shoulder. We call him Ötzi. And Ötzi was fully dressed. Grass cape, bearskin hat, leather shoes stuffed with hay. But underneath all of it was a loincloth, worn between his legs and looped over a belt. Narrow strips of sheep hide, stitched together, about a meter long. Researchers at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology confirmed it was its own separate garment. Not the outer layer, the underlayer. 5,000 years ago, a man already understood the base layer. He is the oldest person we can prove wore underwear. Fast forward a couple of thousand years, and underwear gets an upgrade in Egypt. The Egyptians wore a loincloth called the shenti, a triangle of linen wrapped between the legs and knotted at the waist. For the average farmer, it was often the only thing he wore all day. But for the pharaohs, linen was status. And status meant thread count. The average Egyptian's cloth ran about 50 threads to the inch. Royal linen ran 200. Soft, pale, almost see-through and worth a fortune. And the pharaohs took it seriously. When Tutankhamun was buried around 3,300 years ago, his tomb was packed for eternity. Alongside the gold and the chariots, archaeologists counted 145 spare loincloths, folded and ready for the afterlife. 145 spare loincloths folded for the afterlife. The boy king was not going to spend forever without clean underwear. In Egypt, the loincloth was a symbol of purity, worn by gods and kings, while enslaved people, doing the hardest work, often wore nothing at all. The Romans had their own version, called the subligaculum, a simple cloth worn under the toga. Gladiators wore one. Slaves wore one. And so, it turns out, did female athletes. In a villa near Piazza Armerina in Sicily, there is a floor mosaic that stops tourists cold. It is called the Room of the 10 Girls. 10 young women laid out in tiny colored tiles are running, throwing a discus, lifting weights, and playing ball, and everyone wears a modern-looking two-piece. A sublegaculum on the bottom, a band of cloth called a strophium across the chest. A bikini, essentially, 1,700 years before the beach. People call it the bikini mosaic, and the resemblance is uncanny. But these were not swimsuits. They were athletic underwear, worn for sport 17 centuries before anyone put the word bikini on a beach. The Romans had basically invented the sports bra and forgotten to tell anyone. Then Rome falls, and for a while the trail of underwear goes quiet. Mostly because nobody was writing lovingly about their undergarments, but paintings show us medieval men wore braies. These were loose linen drawers, baggy shorts tied at the waist with a drawstring, worn by a man under his tunic and hose. Peasants would strip to their braies in the heat, which is why medieval farming scenes show men in what look like billowy white boxer shorts. They could be hitched up short for hard labor or worn long and loose. For hundreds of years, this baggy linen was the standard male underwear across Europe. And here the story hits a wall because for women, historians assumed there was nothing underneath. No bra, no knickers, just layers of dress. That assumption was about to be blown apart. Blown apart by a pile of old garbage buried in an Austrian castle. In 2008, workers renovating Lengberg Castle in East Tyrol pulled up some floorboards and found a vault stuffed with old rubbish. Dry, dark, and perfectly preserved. Buried in there, along with shoes and scraps of wood, were about 2,700 textile fragments, and 4 of them were bras. Not breastbands, not wrapped cloth. Actual bras with 2 distinct stitched cups and shoulder straps, one even decorated with lace. Beatrix Nutz, an archaeologist at the University of Innsbruck, had them radiocarbon dated. The radiocarbon dates came back to the 1400s. This rewrote a chapter of fashion history in a single afternoon. Textbooks said the bra was invented around 1900. The Lengberg find pushed that back by roughly 500 years to the 15th century. Somebody had already worked out the cut cup, the exact idea we still use today, and then history simply lost the memo for half a millennium. Remarkable. And a little sad. After that, underwear went through its stiff and uncomfortable era. From the 16th century, the corset took over. It was boned and laced tight to reshape the whole torso into whatever shape the century wanted. For men and women both, the 19th century brought the union suit. A single buttoned garment of knitted wool that covered you from neck to ankle in one piece. It is the reason we say long johns. Practical, warm, and about as romantic as a potato sack. For most of human history, underwear had been a scrap of cloth. Now it had become architecture, engineered to hold you in, prop you up, and keep you warm through an unheated winter. The whole point had drifted from covering the body to shaping it. So why, after all those centuries of loincloths, did underwear suddenly become an industry? There is one more branch worth following, because it explains everything modern. In 1874, a company in Boston called Bike made a garment for a very specific problem. Bicycle couriers riding over Boston's cobblestone streets were in a lot of pain, for reasons you can probably imagine. The solution was the jock strap, built to hold everything in place. It was named for those bike jockeys bouncing over the stones. On its own, a small footnote. But that little support strap is the direct ancestor of the snug underwear that took over the world. Comfort had been the goal for 170,000 years. Support was the new idea, and support was about to sell. The answer was the 20th century, and it moved fast. In 1925 came a man named Jacob Guillaume, the founder of the boxing brand Everlast, tired of the leather belts fighters used to hold up their trunks. So he swapped in an elastic waistband, and the loose shorts looked like what boxers wore in the ring. The name stuck. Boxer shorts. Comfortable and airy, but at first almost nobody bought them for daily wear because they gave no support and bunched up under trousers. The boxer arrived a decade too early. It needed a rival, and that rival showed up on January 19, 1935 in a Chicago blizzard. A designer named Arthur Knabler, working for a Wisconsin hosiery company called Cooper's, had gotten a postcard from the French Riviera showing a man in a snug little swimsuit. It gave him an idea. He designed a legless, close-fitting undergarment with an overlapping Y-shaped fly. offering the support that boxers lacked. Coopers put the first 600 pairs on display at Marshall Field's in Chicago. 600 pairs on display in the middle of a snowstorm. Despite the storm, all 600 pairs sold out that same day. Within 3 months, they had sold 30,000. They named the design the jockey because the snug support reminded people of a jockstrap. And the modern brief was born, and the company did so well it eventually renamed itself Jockey after the product. So walk back through all of it. Ötzi's sheep hide wrap, the pharaoh's linen, the Roman athlete's subligaculum, the braies, the bras, the boxers, the briefs. We tell ourselves underwear exists because of modesty, because at some point humans got shy and decided to hide. But modesty is nowhere near the beginning. The first humans wrapped that scrap of hide around their middle 170,000 years ago. For warmth, for protection, to carry things, to guard the most vulnerable part of the body. The shame came thousands of years later, layered on top of a habit that was already ancient. Underwear did not come from modesty. Modesty borrowed underwear, which was already there, and claimed it as its own. And that original job never went away. Strip away the branding and your underwear does what Ötzi's loincloth did. A soft layer between your body and the rough world. Protection, comfort, a little dignity. 170,000 years ago, a scrap of hide. 5,300 years ago, sheepskin on a belt in the Alps. 3,300 years ago, royal linen in a tomb. 1,100 years ago, an athlete's wrap in Sicily. 90 years ago, cotton off a shelf in a Chicago blizzard. This morning, you, reaching into a drawer. The same act over and over, running quietly through every human life that has ever happened. We did not start wearing underwear because we were ashamed of our bodies. We started because the world is cold and hard and sharp, and the oldest instinct is to soften it. Put something between yourself and all of that. Everything since is just 170,000 years of refining one idea. The linen and the lace and the whalebone and the waistbands, all the same simple idea. The most private thing you own turns out to be one of the most human. It connects you to a frozen man in the Alps, a king in a tomb, a girl throwing a discus. So the next time you get dressed and reach for that first quiet layer, remember, you are doing one of the oldest things a person can do. Every study and site in this one is real, all linked in the description if you want to dig deeper. Ötzi is still up in that museum, still wearing his "Take care of yourselves."